Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashaadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vitraika Panaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sudam Devam Kamsachanura Mardhanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you for joining us for the Bhagavad Gita class again. We are in the second half of chapter 15 now. And I will begin by reminding you the structure of the whole chapter so that you will be clear when we resume the verses from verse 13. So the structure is that it has, the chapter itself has 4 parts to it. And the first part is the first 3 verses where Lord Krishna explains samsara, or the ocean of birth and death repeated over and over and over again. Then from the second half of verse 3 through verse 5, Krishna was talking about solutions for this ocean of transmigration, some way to put it to an end, bring it to an end. And he says we have to cut and fell the tree of samsara. The analogy has been to a tree. So if we can bring an end to that tree of samsara, then we will effectively attain liberation. And liberation means nothing other than knowing Brahman. And Brahman, the supreme existence, is the root of this tree of samsara. Because the idea is that this world around us, what we're seeing, Maya, is samsara, nothing else. And it has a degree of existence because we're experiencing it. But it is always changing and it doesn't have permanent existence. So for that existence, it relies on Brahman, which is existence itself. So that's why it's called the root. And then in the third section of the chapter, we get the main teachings of this 15th chapter, and actually the entire Bhagavad Gita. The essence of it is here. And there are 3 sections to that main teaching, all of which basically lead to the same thing. But he takes it in steps. First, from verse 6 to 11, he talked about the oneness of Brahman, or the Supreme Being, and the individual. So you have the universal soul and the individual soul. These 2 are the same. That was his point. And then from verse 12 to 15, he talks about the oneness of Brahman with the world. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. And then at the end of that section, verse 16 to 18, is this topic of what is called Sarvatma Bhava, Just means seeing everything as the Atma, the true self, which Amma does. So when we get to that section, we'll get one verse of that today, and we'll get a sort of a sneak preview of what Amma's vision is like. So last class we finished that section about the Supreme Soul and the individual soul being the same. And in that section we learned that whether we find our experience of life to be sad or happy, that experience itself is proof of a life force that exists. We cannot say nothing exists, so it's just all, a vacuum, or shunyavada they call it. There's nothing, it's mu, nothing exists. Well then, how can we experience this world? That experience itself is proof of an experiencer. And that life force, that jiva, is what gives importance to everything in our life. Sadly, most of us forget that the jiva doesn't stay in one body forever. That reflection of consciousness goes from body to body as we take new births. But forgetting that we're going to have to vacate this body at one point, we madly pursue wealth, possession, status, recognition, and so many other things. And while we are busy pursuing all these worldly things, we forget to value the most important thing that we have already, which is life itself. None of these things mean anything if you don't have life. So that is why people who have near-death experiences say that they learn just how precious life is. Last class we ended with verse 12. And we just entered that topic of Brahman, or the Supreme Being, being one with this world. And this is a step towards that final teaching that everything is Brahman. And Krishna, he, instead of using the word Brahman, Brahman is this, Brahman is that, he says that this is me, this is me. Just a few examples, and then as a way to show, not exhaustively, but the key points that everything is me. That's what he's going towards. And you can just imagine he's a longtime friend of Arjuna, or we can say Arjuna is a longtime friend of Krishna. So he doesn't need to say Brahman this, Brahman that. He's just saying, I'm this, that is me. He's saying everything is him. And it makes sense because, just imagine Amma is telling you something, and she says, this is all Brahman. Then for us it'll feel like, okay, it's separate from Amma because she's using the word Brahman. But if she says, all this is me, then we're like, yeah, that makes sense because you're everything to me already. So I can understand how everything can be you. So it's like that. So it's more natural for us to hear it from someone well known to us if they say it's me. And in fact, any and every realized being can make the same statement without lying. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, one of the highest scriptures in the Vedas, a realized being proclaims, I am the food, I am the food. He repeats himself 3 times, which is ahamannam, ahamannam, ahamannam. If you go to a temple somewhere or you hear some Vedic chanting, you may have heard that verse. And then he says, I'm the eater, and he repeats that 3 times. I'm the unifier, and unifier, the one who unifies the eaten and the eater. So he's that also. He says, I am the firstborn of this world, consisting of that which is with form and without form. I am earlier than the gods. I am the navel of immortality. I engulf the entire universe. My effulgence is like that of the sun. Now, if that's the experience of this rishi, then we know that is unquestionably Amma's experience every second of the day. She is just very good at concealing that. In the early days of the ashram, she wouldn't conceal it. She would go into samadhi all the time. But now she's being a good girl. And she's keeping herself from shining too much, otherwise we wouldn't be able to handle it. She used to just laugh for like a half an hour in bliss, and nobody could stop her. Okay, coming back to the topic. Krishna is speaking from this standpoint of being one with Brahman in this section of the chapter. And like I said, his message is basically, I'm everything, or everything is me. And to convey that message, he first pointed out that he's the individual soul that we identify with when we say, I have to do this, I have to do that. Yesterday I did that, tomorrow I have to do this. All these things, that I, that is Brahman. And he's claiming that, rightly so. So the one who experiences everything is the jiva, or the jivatma, we can say. And now in this section, he is going to say that I am also this whole universe that the jiva experiences. So I'm the experiencer, and I'm that which is experienced, the whole universe. Last week, Krishna started this new topic by saying that he is the light of the sun, the moon, the fire, etc. And it is enough for him to choose those few examples. He is not going to go on. And our understanding should be that everything is coming from the Paramatman. And we resume this topic from verse 13 now. Please, we can chant together. You can repeat after me, and then we will chant the whole verse together as a group. Gama Vishya Chabutani Dharayam Yaham Ojasa Pushnami Chaushadhi Sarva Somo Bhutva Rasatmakaha. Now together. Gama Vishya Chabutani Dharayam Yahamojasa Pushnami Chaushadhi Sarva Somo Bhutva Rasatmakaha. And I usually take some liberty in modifying the English. Entering the earth with my energy, I support all beings, and I nourish all the herbs by becoming the nectarous moon. So what I changed is that word permeating can also be interpreted, but more literally it's entering. And most of the translations I've seen say entering, but I think that concept of permeation is also very relevant because it's mentioned in some of the commentaries you'll see. And that word energy is actually ojas. Ojas, we're going to talk about that in a moment. And the literal translation of nourishing all the herbs is to make all the herbs thrive. And I don't believe there is a word nectarian. I couldn't find it in the dictionary, so nectarous is grammatically correct here. So Shankaracharya says, I sustain all beings, the whole world, with my power, free from desire and attachment. The reference is to the divine form present in the earth for its sustenance. Due to that force, the earth does not collapse. That's what he's saying. So if we didn't have this ojas power, the whole earth would just collapse. And in the Vedas it says, by which the firmament and the mighty earth are held steadfast. So there is a power that we are not at all cognizant of that is holding everything together. And that's what he says is me, or him. It means Brahman. Interestingly, this claim is substantiated, the claim about the moon, becoming the nectarous moon, that is actually substantiated not only by modern science, but it was also known to Native Americans, including the Chippewa, just a little north of here, about the Canadian border. And they said that the full moon is when the maple sap, or the maple syrup, flows most. So they knew that there were certain times when the saps and the essences of these plants would flow more, because it's the power of the moon. The life energy comes in one form from the sun, and in another time it's coming from the moon. Though that energy gets converted into a multitude of forms in nature as needed to sustain the creation, all energy, in fact, comes from the Paramatma, and that is the key point. So when we're researching something like that, we divide things into gazillions of energies, but really there's only one base energy, and that is what is meant by ojas, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So what is entering? He says, I'm entering the earth or permeating the earth. And we can understand from the commentaries that that is a reference to the sun's power, which he mentioned in the previous verse. So the power of the sun is entering, and that is mine. So it belongs to Brahman. So I myself enter the earth in the form of sunlight. That's the point. And last time we talked about all the positive effects of sunlight on human beings. But in the commentary for this verse, Shankaracharya includes the whole world. He says not just human beings, it's good for insects, plants, microbes, everything. And that's why Krishna says he's supporting all beings. So not just the physical body, but the subtle body as well. And we're going to find out how that happens later on in today's class. Sustaining the bodies, subtle and physical, of all living beings. It does not mean the Jivatma itself, because the Jivatma is not, inert matter, whereas the body, even the mind, is inert matter according to Vedanta. So ojas, what is ojas? What does it mean? So in nature, energy transforms from one form to another. We know that. There's kinetic energy, static energy, there's chemical energy, and so many other types of energy. And that's manifest energy, because we can measure it with devices that we have. But in its original form, as it emanates from God, it is called as ojas. So you could think of ojas as the sort of neutral, universal energy. And then that is what transforms into all these specific energies that we can identify. But that ojas, it pervades the entire universe and holds it intact, giving sustenance to all the living beings, including plants and, of course, including us also. Amma has a very clear view of this. When some years ago, I think it was 1995 or 7 or somewhere around there, she gave a speech at the United Nations, just one of many, and she said the life force that pulsates in the trees, plants, and animals is the same life force that pulsates within us. The same life energy that gives us the power to speak and to sing is the power behind the song of the bird and the roar of the lion. So she sees that all the energy, there's only one energy, we just give different names to the manifestations. And I love this part of it because I'm a big fan of herbs. He says, I nourish all the herbs by becoming the nectarous moon. Now here we should understand that even though the word is herb that's being used here, it means medicinal herbs too, but here it actually just means all plants. So we can take it in both ways, but we should not omit the non-medicinal plant. Everything's medicinal, really, but not the common ones. So just consider it to be the whole plant kingdom. And Jnanadev has something so occult to say here. I mean, he loves the occult. He always says things like this, but it's how the moon nourishes all these herbs. He only a realized being can explain it like this. He says, I am the vast moving lake full of nectar in the form of the moon. I nourish all the herbs and medicinal plants by providing them with water in the form of lunar rays through the channels of the moon lake. Here's a guy, he's like 16 years old. If you didn't know that, he was a teenager. And end of his life, he determined, he says, he told his disciples, I'm going to meditate forever. So just inter me in the mausoleum, and then I'll just spend the rest of my time there. And he did that. And when he finished this commentary, he said, I'm done. You can see why he shared so much in this one commentary. And he continues also, similarly, I nourish all kinds of grain and crops, making them abundant, and thus protect all beings by providing them with food. So the moonlight is considered to be full of rasam. Rasam means like nectar or nourishment or nutrients. There's even a drink called rasam, and it makes you feel, energized. But according to the scriptures, the moonlight does contain a lot of nourishing energy, which is transferred to the plants. And then we eat the plants, even if it's a non-vegetarian diet. The animals that you're eating eat nothing but grains, right? So when we eat those plants, that nourishment is absorbed by our body. Shankaracharya says about this, he says, I make the plants and herbs juicy and sweet. The moon is the abode of all essences. It instills the respective saps in all plants and herbs. From how many millions of miles from here, it's doing all that for us, for all beings. And no wonder that in formulating his system of biodynamic farming, Rudolf Steiner integrated the phases of the moon in the planting and harvesting schedule. So it's been known for many hundreds, perhaps thousands of years by the ancient cultures. So he adapted that ancient wisdom to the modern day. I'm not a practitioner of it, but I know some of those techniques. So in sum, we get the nourishment from the plant kingdom gets nourishment from the moonlight, and the moonlight is none other than the power of the Paramatman. So no matter how you look at it, everything is coming from the Paramatman. And Amma once said, the earth, trees, plants, and animals are all manifestations of God. We should love them as we love our own self. Actually, we should love them even more than ourselves, because only with nature's support can human beings exist. Very good point. And Jnanadev says here, even if food is produced, will it suffice if it is not supplemented by the fire of hunger that brings about digestion and makes the beings enjoy satisfaction? So he's hinting, what about the digestive process? How is that going to work? And that's what's coming in verse 14. Aham Vaishvanaro Bhutva Praninam Dehamashritaha Pranapana Samayuktaha Pachamyannam Chaturvidham. Together. Aham Vaishvanaro Bhutva Praninam Dehamashritaha Pranapana Samayuktaha Pachamyannam Chaturvidham. Abiding in the body of all creatures as the digestive fire, Vaishvanara, united with prana and apana, I digest the four kinds of food. I just added that word digestive fire and I moved I towards the end. So Shankaracharya says here, the eater is the Vaishvanara Agni. Agni just means fire. So the one who actually eats the food is not me, it is the Vaishvanara Agni, the fire of digestion. And what it consumes is the food, which can be called soma in this case. One who perceives that these two constitute all that exists is never affected by the impurity of food. So the interesting point here is, let's say that there's some food that is given by, typically things that are sold for profit are considered to be impure. According to the old, times, food was supposed to be given freely. So when you're charging for it, it becomes impure. But a lot of people, most everybody in the world today has to pay for their food. So that food, in order to purify it, we just remember that I'm not eating this. I am the consciousness. It is the Vaishvanara Shakti, Agni in the belly that is going to eat it. So I'm not involved at all. There's the food, and then there's the one who consumes it. I'm the witness. Which is true, because we're not doing anything when the digestion takes place. We don't go down there and make it happen. We're totally oblivious. So it's actually true. We just don't think of it that way. Jnanadev has said so many things here. I'll share it with you. He has a lot to say today, so I'm going to have to read it out quickly. Therefore, I become the fire by kindling it in the navel region of all beings. And working day and night, the pair of bellows in the form of prana and apana, which are incoming and outgoing breath, in other words, I effect digestion of an unlimited volume of food. Not all at once. Throughout our lifetime, it's an immeasurable amount of food that we eat. And I digest all the fourfold food. Here, Jnanadev's definition of the fourfold, in other words, four types of food is dry, oily, well-cooked, and badly cooked, not properly cooked. All these things, the Vaishvanara Agni, the digestive fire, will digest. In short, I am the entire world as also the food supplied to it, and I am likewise the fire, the principal means of digesting that food. There is nothing else but me. I pervade all. This is still Jnanadev. Why is it then that some are not happy and some are happy in this world? How is it that some of the lamps should be without light when all lamps in the town derive light from one and the same source? Were any such doubts to arise in your mind, I now shall clear those doubts. I am everywhere, and there is nothing except myself. Yet I appear in different ways to different people according to their respective discerning powers. In other words, the intellect, the buddhi. Water takes the form of different trees according to the properties of the different seeds. In that way, my spirit, which is homogeneous, is metaphorized into a heterogeneous manifestation of diverse beings. The same Swati is one of the birth stars. Some of you listening may have Swati nakshatra or birth star. So he's talking about the rainwater that falls on Swati that night or that day. The same Swati rainwater gets converted into pearls in an oyster and also into poison in a snake. In that way, I become the cause of pleasure to the wise, while of pain to the ignorant. It makes so much sense. You get rain. If you're prepared, it's not going to, wash away your house. But if you're not prepared, if you're foolish and you don't take the proper precautions, your house can get washed away. So the farmer prays for it, but the unprepared person suffers. And I looked this up because I had forgotten this reference. And it does seem that Swati is related to the 7th day of the waxing and waning phases of the moon. It is also related to the flow of the life force, the prana, through the body, and its constitutional type is kapha, which is watery. So it has that power to manipulate water, the water element. And just like, plants need sap, And a pearl needs that energy to create, an oyster needs that power to create a pearl. But what does a snake need? A snake doesn't need a pearl. A snake needs venom. A poisonous snake does. So that's the point. Earlier, Krishna said that the light of fire is also his power, with the the sunlight sustaining the earth and the moonlight nourishing the plants. But now we need to know how digestion takes place. So through that fire, which is really by modern science, it's a complex process that takes place in at least 7 organs. But according to the ancient wisdom, it is the whole complex of that process is relying on this Vaishvanara Shakti, that power of digestion, the fire of digestion. And he says he's abiding in all of the creatures as that digestive fire. That's the point. And it is actually a cooking process. Think of it as that. Because when you use fire, if you're in the old days, everything was firewood, and you would cook using that. So using that, we cook the ingredients to make something that we can eat. Like it could be sambar, soup, lasagna, whatever it may be. But that food that we made gets cooked again to make something that the body can eat. And that means that we need 2 types of fire, the external fire and the inner fire. The inner fire is what is called Vaishvanara, Agni. So that's why eating has been compared to an Agnihotra. Here in the ashram, you may have seen, and in DC and sometimes San Ramon, doing fire ceremonies. We call them homas. More commonly in the Vedic days, it was called like Agnihotra, a simplified version of those. So you have a fire pit, and you're offering things into that, right? So in this case, the fire pit is the stomach. And the Vaishvanara Agni is the fire itself. And in the homas, the fire always represents the main deity. So that's nothing unusual. And we're offering it into that fire, which is the deity in this case. And that fire is called samana prana. There's 5 basic forms of prana, of life force. And so that fire itself is called, the digestive fire is called samana prana in some circumstances. So when we eat something, we are offering that food into the stomach homakunda, the stomach fire pit, but not to the fire pit. The devata, or the god, is actually that fire of digestion. So junk food, if we have junk food, we're offering junk food. Just think of it as amma. You're giving amma in your stomach, in your belly. You're giving her junk food. Would we do that? Right? And it's a perennial homa. It's not just once in a while. It's going on constantly. You may have noticed in the scriptures that fire is a symbol for many things. Once, while cooking with firewood, Amma said, "The fire is tapas. The fire boils the water and steam is produced. The steam cooks the raw ingredients into a delicious food. People can then appease their hunger by eating this good food. Similarly, we are raw and uncooked now. We are a bunch of useless things called the body, mind, and intellect. Yet we carry them around with us with great pride. We are full of selfishness and egotism. These raw, useless faculties should be cooked in the heat of tapas. Tapas means austerity, like fasting and so many other vows. It should be cooked in the heat of tapas to transform them into something useful. For this to happen, the water of the mind, ego, and thoughts should disappear in the intense heat of tapas. Tapas makes the mind subtler, pure, and more expansive. Thus, you become a good and helpful person for the world. When you can love and serve humanity, you become food for the world." Isn't that amazing? Such a beautiful way of thinking of it. So anything that goes on in your life that you feel very challenging, like you're getting like pressures building up inside of you like a pressure cooker, this is tapas. And instead of being angry and saying, oh, that guy did this or she did that, she said this, my boss that, my spouse this, instead of getting angry and frustrated with people, understand that you are getting cooked. And that's a good thing. Because only then will we be of any use to the world. That's Amma's point. She has also said that a realized being is like fire. Whatever goes into that fire gets consumed by the flames and disappears. So that frustration, you can just imagine you're doing a fire ceremony and dumping that into Amma's fire. And that's why a lot of people come and bring things they want to relinquish. When they go for darshan, they'll come to Amma and give cigarettes. I haven't seen anything really crazy. Mostly cigarettes or things like that. And one day I was sitting behind Amma's chair, and I noticed that there was a pack of cigarettes underneath Amma's chair. And it just didn't occur to me at that moment that it was, something that somebody had relinquished, with the prayer that Amma would take away their addiction. So I picked up those cigarettes, and I was wondering, is there anything in here? Because, if there's nothing in there, that would make more sense. So I opened it, and it's full of cigarettes, and I just started to pull one out, and then this guy next to me looking at me is like, are you going to start smoking behind Amma? And I was like, no, I'm just putting it, just checking to see if it's real. So anyhow, that fire analogy, metaphor is so powerful. But what happens after the Vaishvanara Agni cooks the food? That's another point, a very important point. According to Ayurveda and the scriptures, actually, the food gets broken down into the 5 elements. Not just the physical 5 elements, but also to the subtle ones. The earth portion of the food goes to nourishing and strengthening bones, muscles, organs, and skin. The water or liquid portion of that food goes to nourish the fat. We have to have some fat on our body. Bodily secretions, the mucous membranes, and the plasma of the blood. And the fire element, the heat, is converted mostly to blood, but it's also feeds that digestive fire. And the enzymes in the body, which I believe we have about 1,300 different types of them, so a lot of enzymes need to be nourished. The air element vitalizes the nervous system, and the space, space, we could say that it's beyond that, but in some ways you can say it clears and nourishes the mind and senses. So the Paramatma sustains the earth in the form of sunlight, sustains the food sources in the form of moonlight, and sustains the body in the form of the Vaishvanara Agni. We cannot take credit for any of these things. They're all the Paramatman. And to understand the idea of this bellows, remember we said there's like the ingoing breath and the outgoing breath are like bellows that feed the fire. Imagine, this is like at least 5,200 years old, this scripture. So imagine that you're cooking in big pots of rice, and you're using firewood to boil that huge pot. It takes hours and hours to cook. Forget about 5,200 years ago. Just a couple decades ago in Amma's ashram, we were all doing that. And I remember, it took so long just to get the water to boil. And then you have to boil the rice for some time. And we would calculate how much rice is needed for the residents. But during the Shabarimala pilgrimage time, the Ayyappa pilgrimage time, suddenly a bus of 50, 60 people might show up. And Amma always wants us to serve the guests first. So the whole pot would be gone because there are elderly people who needed food. And so the brahmacharis used to eat last. And then what portion was supposed to go to the brahmacharis went to the pilgrims, which is a good thing. So, but then on such days, you just said, forget lunch. It's by the time they make more rice, it's going to be bhajan, so forget it. So that, I mean, it just takes that long. So you need to make the fire really powerful. So that's what you need a bellows for, like in a blacksmith shop. Not that big, but just to keep the fire going powerfully. That is the ingoing breath and the outgoing breath. So apana is downward prana, so it's the inhalation. And then apana is the exhalation. These two are the bellows that fan the fire of digestion. Sometimes, because apana is a downward facing energy, sometimes it is associated with excretion, which is going downwards, obviously. But in this case, it's referring to the breath. So these fan that fire. So you can imagine when you do a lot of pranayama, it's definitely going to increase your digestive fire. And when you run, you breathe more, you breathe faster. So it's kind of a form of pranayama, you could say. And so people who exercise a lot, they have a bigger appetite. It's all already proven here in the Bhagavad Gita. And we heard Jnanadeva's definition of the 4 types of food, but there's another type, a way of categorizing these also, which I'll share that with you briefly. There's another way of looking at it, which is that 4 types of food are based on how you eat them. There's the ones that you chew, the food you chew. There's the food that you drink, like soup. And then there's things that are sucked, which we'd be like, what do you suck? Well, in India, they have drumsticks, paisam, you kind of suck it, right? It's neither liquid or solid either. And then you have like in Asia, there are these noodles that are just, you have to basically suck them into your mouth to eat them. So that would probably fit in that category. And then there's one more type, which is food that is licked. And typically in India, they compare that with like pickles, because sometimes people, they lick the pickle and don't eat it, whole. And honey, and another thing that the Western contribution to that might be ice cream. So anyhow, whichever way you look at it, I mean, he's saying that I cover all the types of food. I can digest all of them. And I'm the eater, I'm the nourisher, and I am also what is eaten. I'm everything. And just so you know, the reason why this chapter, 15th chapter, is chanted before meals is only because of this verse, the 14th verse. That's the main reason why it's chanted. And we will go on to verse 15. Here the meter changes again. So it's Trishtub meter. So it's going to sound a little different from what we just chanted. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto matta smritit jnanam apohanancha vedescha sarver ahameva vedyo vedanta krid veda videva chaham. Now let's chant it all together. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto matta smritagñanam apohananja vedescha sarver ahameva vedyo vedanta krid veda videva chaham. I am seated in the hearts of all. Memory and perception, as well as their loss, come from me. I alone am that which is worth knowing by all the Vedas. I indeed am the maker of the Vedanta and the knower of the Veda. So I didn't change a whole lot. I got rid of verily, and I think I added alone. Source is also true, but literally that word is the maker. And that's kind of the meaning of author. So some people use that word author. I'm the author of the Veda, of the Vedas and Vedanta, and the knower of them all. So this point, seated in the hearts of all, is a very famous quote from the Bhagavad Gita. And it's also something that Amma used to always say, children, mother has no particular dwelling place of her own. I dwell in your heart. So even though she says she's never read the scriptures, well, she doesn't have to. It's because she's already that. She has also said, clinging to the world obstructs the remembrance of God. But once you become established in this remembrance, you will see and think of everything as God. Once God is enshrined in your heart, life in the world cannot be an obstacle. So bind him with the rope of love. It's nice to think that if we enshrine God in our heart, not only do we don't have to go anywhere special to express our devotion, but at the same time, the world will stop affecting us. It'll stop disrupting our peace of mind. And we can also take it as the opposite. When our peace of mind is lost, that means that we weren't remembering God. That's the opposite corollary of it. Shankaracharya says that dwell in the heart, he says it means in the subtle body of all living beings, which is in line with everything we've been saying in this chapter, that it's the reflection of consciousness in the subtle body. Therefore, do to me, the self, because he's saying, I am the self, do to me, the self, memory, knowledge, and the absence of these two take place. Jnanadev has so much to say here. I'll try to share the essence of it. It goes for pages, so this is the abridged version. The consciousness that throbs day and night in the heart, that I am a particular individual, that is me. Association with saints, the practice of yoga discipline, and worshipping at the feet of the Guru, that's the most important one, with a mind detached from all worldly affairs, all these secure complete removal of spiritual ignorance and make the ego take final rest in my own self. Such ones come to know me automatically and become ever happy through that knowledge. Who else is there to bring about such a state? Because it's talking about the self. If the self cannot bring about that state, who is going to be able to bring it about? The sun is seen by its own light at sunrise. In that way, I am the means of attaining knowledge in regard to myself. So he's talking about I am the way to know me. That's what he's saying in this verse. And I am also what is known, what needs to be known. On the other hand, those whose ego has been merged in their own body on account of their having embraced body identification, they take to actions for worldly happiness and pleasures and in the afterworld, thus experiencing only misery. So basically he says we only have two options. You surrender, you identify with me, or you identify with the body. If you identify with me, all your sorrows are going to dissolve. If you identify with the body, you're just going to suffer more. But of knowledge and ignorance also, I am the sole cause, just as the waking state is at the root of both sleep and dream. Isn't that interesting? So you would wonder, how can the waking state be the source of the dream, or the root of the dream? Well, if there wasn't a person who actually was sentient there's no dream. A dead person can't have a dream, right? So the fact that you're dreaming means that you are a sentient being, and that sentience is consciousness. Just that your consciousness in the dream is limited to the dream world. A cloud makes the daylight dim, yet that same cloud can be seen on account of the daylight. In that way, it is only on account of me that beings perceive the worldly affairs as real, being oblivious of my presence. In short, I am the root cause of knowledge and ignorance in all beings, in the way sentience is the cause of slumber and wakefulness. Not knowing the real nature of my form, the Vedas made an attempt to know me. Isn't that amazing? He's saying that. This 15-year-old boy is saying this. The Vedas made an attempt to know me. Why is it an attempt? Because you cannot explain it in words, but what else can you do? You try, like Amma does. But the result was that instead of knowing me, different branches blossomed forth from them, the Vedas. Yet these two ultimately impart knowledge in regard to myself, since rivers going eastwards or westwards have only one end, the ocean. The Shrutis, which means the Vedas, the Shrutis lose their power of speech and become nonplussed at the point, I am myself, Supreme Brahman. They become stuck, in the way the fragrant breeze gets extinguished in the sky. In this manner, when the Vedas, as if overwhelmed by the sense of shame, are transfixed, I reveal myself, helping them to explain my nature correctly. I am the knower of that pure knowledge, the advent of which reduces the Vedas together with the entire universe to nothingness. Isn't that beautiful? The advent of pure knowledge reduces the Vedas to nothingness. It reduces the whole universe to nothingness. Nothing seen in a dream remains when one wakes up from sleep and he realizes that he's all alone. In that way, I realize my own non-dualistic state without any delusion, and I am myself the cause of self-realization. So when you realize the self, you realize that you are all alone. There's nothing else. That's what Amma says. She says she is alone. She's not lonely. She's alone. Everybody who comes to her is her. So she said, there's nobody other than me. I'm alone. When this state arises, there remains nothing like existence or non-existence, because the knowledge that destroys all ignorance has itself ceased to exist. In the way there remains neither ash nor fire when the camphor is burned out. That's why we use the camphor for oddity, because it doesn't leave any residue. And the concept is that when you attain the self, there's nothing left, just the self, and everything is the self. There's no second thing. How is it possible to trace the thief that has taken away the entire universe, leaving behind no trail whatsoever? There exists such a thing as the pure state of knowledge, and I am that state, he says definitively. While the Lord was describing his totally attributeless state, if one were to ask how deeply this impressed itself on Arjuna's mind, the answer is the following. As the rising moon in the sky is reflected in the sea, so too Sri Krishna's teaching was transplanted to Arjuna's mind. The knowledge of the Supreme Self is so wonderful that the more it is tasted, the greater is the liking for it. So he wasn't sleeping, that's for sure. Arjuna said, O Lord, you referred to some attributeless form. Do make that form clear to me for all. Do make that form clear to me once and for all in unambiguous terms. Upon this, Lord Krishna said, well done asking such a question. I also always love to talk with fervor on this topic, but I feel handicapped. Why? Since I don't find pure seekers like you anywhere. This is what Amma says. She says, in order to celebrate Guru Purnima, there should be at least one disciple. Where are the disciples? So really, we are not qualified to even celebrate Guru Purnima with her, because we have to be real disciples. Today my wish has borne fruit in you, who are asking me a mouthful of questions with a free mind. This is the dream that everybody has. Amma is coming and says, I was waiting for you, right? So this Arjuna was that, because he wanted to know so desperately. You have made me supremely happy by seeking to know the attributeless form that can be realized only after attaining non-duality. Speaking in this way, Lord Krishna embraced Arjuna, looked at him with a fond eye, and then said, although there are two lips, the words coming out of them are one and the same. That is the kind of free question and answer between us. While talking in this way, the Lord became as if obsessed with great affection and embraced Arjuna. Experiencing a bit of fear, he thought to himself that such an exhibition of affection on his part was maybe not proper. So cute the way he's written it. While preparing a lump of jaggery from sugarcane juice, salt is also added to prevent it from spoiling. In that way, if not checked, the Lord's obsession would only spoil the sweetness of their talk. So this sounds like kind of a bizarre concept, but there was one time an amazing moment during the Boston program, and I can't remember whether it was 1995 or 1996, but Swamiji was singing that song, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. You might have heard that. It's a very long song, and it starts off very slow, and it usually speeds up halfway through. And he was singing it, Swamiji was singing with so much bhava, so much feeling. And Swamiji himself, you could see the tears coming down from his eyes. And the more feeling he put in it, the more distracted Amma became while she was giving darshan. Because Amma was giving darshan, he was sitting behind her, or just to the side, kind of. And so she would, be hugging somebody, and then she'd be like, and her eyes would like roll up, and like you could just see the whites of her eyes, And then it became a kind of a disturbance because she couldn't focus on darshan. So she picked up the chocolate candy, the chocolate kisses, and she started throwing at him. Stop it, stop it. But Swamiji he just kept going on. But he was so moved by that song that he just couldn't finish it practically. He didn't go fast, he just stopped in between, and he was just completely silent. So it's like that, I imagine. Krishna is struggling to control himself because he's found the perfect disciple. Arjuna replied in a tearful voice, swayed by love, "O Master, I said, tell me about your attributeless form." Hearing this, Krishna started speaking on the theme of attributes, classifying them in two categories. One might wonder why he, Lord Krishna, talked of attributes when he was asked about the attributeless form. Doesn't it sound like a contradiction? Here's the answer, and this is very important for us to understand because it's the basic principle of the scriptures and the Vedantic philosophy. To separate essence from the churned buttermilk is called taking out butter. To burn out alloy from the gold is called purifying the gold. One can reach water only after pushing aside the moss on the surface of the water. When the clouds have passed by, the clear sky remains. One immediately obtains the grain once the husk is removed. In the same way, it hardly needs explaining that attributeless is what remains behind after removing all the attributes. And he gives another metaphor which we won't understand unless we understand ancient Indian culture. In ancient India, a married woman, especially a young one, would never speak the name of their husband. They would use respect form words like, elder brother or Swami. They used to even say Swami or Bhagavan or something like that. So they wouldn't say the name. And then, so what Jnanadev says is, if asked to repeat a list of names, a young newlywed stops and remains silent when she reaches a particular name, and thereby she indirectly makes her husband's name known, because she doesn't want to read out his name out loud. So then you know, his name is Suresh, or his name is Jeevan, or her name is Balu, or something like that. So it's the one name that she can't say out loud. And indirectly, she makes her husband's name known. In that way, when the faculty of speech remains mute, it displays the unmanifested and indescribable form of the Supreme Self. I can't imagine a 15-year-old saying all these things, but that's how Mahatmas are. They're very special. So seated in the hearts of all as consciousness, and it means that Brahman is the witness consciousness that we've been meditating on during this chapter. After the class portion, we sit and meditate for some time. That consciousness is supposed to be the witness of everything. That's why we meditate like that. So what is the proof that he is seated in the hearts of all? Well, memory is a pretty good example of a conscious principle being in our subtle body. Perception, knowledge, all these things, they are coming from that consciousness. So if we didn't have memory, every day we would come here, every week we would come here and do the Gita, verse 1, chapter 1, over and over and over again, because no memory. Even as it is, we struggle to remember things. But the point is that it's because there's consciousness there that we can remember what happened yesterday, tomorrow. Otherwise, Amma would just be teaching us the same teaching every time she comes. And also the fact that we know something or don't know something is because we have consciousness. I am conscious of the fact that I know this. I'm conscious of the fact that I don't know this. I knew this, I forgot, now I don't know it. So all these things are evident from the light of consciousness, that's all. So Krishna's point here is that every function of the mind is simply due to the pure consciousness, which he calls himself. And we would say, well, if that consciousness is in the subtle body, why can't the subtle body take some credit for it? Well, the reason why it cannot is because, if you remember the previous 13th chapter and 14th chapter, the mind is inert. It is actually matter, but subtle matter. So inherently inert. And when the consciousness activates it, only then does it think and remember and things like that. So it is really the Chittabhasa, the reflection of consciousness, that makes all these things happen. The mind itself does not have any such power of its own. So it's like the mind is like the radio without electricity, and the consciousness is the electricity that makes the radio able to receive the radio waves. So that's what he's saying. I am the electricity that's making everything work. And I am that which is worth knowing by all the Vedas. So this is just all the teachings that Amma is giving us. This is, she's teaching us who she is. So she's not only the guru, she's the knowledge itself, and she's the goal. She's everything. Like that, he's saying, I'm everything, just like Amma is everything to us. In this context, Veda is not limited just to those scriptures that we are aware of, Rig, Yajus, Sama, Atharva, like that. It means all knowledge. In the old days, Veda just meant all knowledge, even if it's not in the specifically included in the four Vedas. So up to this verse is that topic of Brahman or Paramatman being one with this world that we see around us. And he's established now that he's not only the experiencer, but the experienced. And next he is going to move on to the topic of Sarvatma Bhava. Now that we've understood that the seer, the experiencer, and the experienced are all one, now we can just see this whole universe as being the self, nothing else. And Shankaracharya says that these next 4, 16, 17, 18, 3 verses are are the sum total of the Bhagavad Gita. So it's very important for us. Let's read verse 16 now. Dvavimau Purushau loke Sharas Chakshara evacha Sharas sarvani Bhutani Kodasto Kshara uchate. I forgot to mention that it goes back to the shloka meter. So that previous verse was just one verse in between where the meter is different. Let's read it together. Dvavimau purushau loke ksharascha evacha kshara sarvani bhutani Kodastokshara uchate. I changed this a bit. No, not a whole lot actually, sorry. There are the perishable and the imperishable Purushas, which means spirits or beings in the world. All beings are the perishable, and the Kodastha, what we have in parentheses, embodied self, is called the imperishable. So I made embodied self into parentheses because it doesn't really mean that directly. Kodastha is the word used here, and I'll explain what that means. Kodastha means like the immovable, something that is uniform everywhere, is unchangeable, perpetual, and universally the same. So from that basic meaning, it is derived that it is the soul. So that's why the translation says embodied self. It is that, but it comes from this meaning. And if you didn't already hear me say it before, I take these liberties with the translation because the original translation has no commentary. And obviously, I would imagine the people who translated it and prepared this ashram version of the Bhagavad Gita wanted to make the language clear so that people wouldn't get the wrong understanding or wrong interpretation. But here we're talking about all the verses in depth, so I'm just trying to keep it more literal. So in this verse, Krishna is introducing two Purushas. Purushas, if you remember, was the consciousness. It was. Now, we're going to talk about what it means here. He's talking about the perishable and imperishable Purushas. In this verse, those two are inert matter. They're part of Maya. Normally, it's not the case when you use that word Purusha. So that's why we have to be very careful. In the Gita, he uses the same word with different nuance sometimes. And there's also a third Purusha, but we're not going to talk about that until the next verse. It's basically the pure consciousness. Spoiler alert. A little late for that spoiler alert. But that's going to come in the next verse. And Krishna says there's two types of Purushas, and then he defines what they are. The perishable one is all beings. That means the physical body and our subtle body as well. And the Kodastha, or the embodied self, is the imperishable. That second one needs a little explanation, but let's talk about that first one, the perishable one. It is the entire material universe. Everything that science knows, everything that we know, all of our possessions, all of our friends and relatives and their feelings, everything. It's the subtle bodies as well. So it's the entire gross and subtle universe. That's a whole lot. What's left then, we might say, because consciousness is coming in the next verse, so what's left between the whole universe and consciousness? Well, the answer is that it is only changeless from the relative standpoint. It's still Maya, but it's a different take on Maya. It's only relatively permanent, because the permanent is obviously going to be Brahman or Paramatma or something like that. So the imperishable Purusha here is only considered to be so when compared to the perishable one. So this body is perishable. This whole building is perishable. Everything on the planet Earth is perishable, right? This planet has a time limit on it. It's going to expire, and everything on this planet is going to go bye-bye. Who knows when, but it's not forever. So if the world is temporary, then everything in my life and your life is also temporary. Shankaracharya gives a little more explanation, saying the imperishable Purusha is the Lord's power of Maya, which we call Maya Shakti. The seed from which the perishable Purusha, in other words, this body and my mind and my intellect and all that, from which that springs up, and upon which depend the desires, acts, and vasanas of the numerous beings in samsara. So when Shantamritananda Puri is here, sitting here talking, that's one thing. But, in the past gazillions of births, there may have been in between what's called the pralaya kalam, which is the state of the universal dissolution. And there's no physical universe, but there's still Maya in seed form remains. So the next creation comes, and then the Maya goes. That's what the scientists call Big Bang. It's just the resumption where we left off. That's all it is. And so then all the living beings come back in their various births as they need to based on their karma. So he's saying that the karma is still stored there. The bodies that are needed are stored there. All of our vasanas are stored there. Sorry, they're not going to go away that easily. And so that storehouse of karma, which exists even when this whole physical universe doesn't exist, that is called the imperishable, because in one sense it is imperishable. It's Maya. It's the Maya Shakti. It keeps coming back. However, when you realize God or the self, it goes away. You realize that it doesn't actually exist. Our problem is that we haven't reached that so far, so it feels so real. So this so-called imperishable entity is Maya Shakti itself. And that's what exists in seed form during the pralaya, during the dissolution of the universe. So in that sense, only it can be said that Maya does not get destroyed. With self-knowledge, it gets destroyed. That's a separate, we're going to talk about that later. In fact, Amma always tells us the world is the visible form of God. So it will always be here in some form. Either it'll be here in the manifest form or in the unmanifest form. So that unmanifest form that exists even without the physical creation, that's what's referred to here as the imperishable. So the world is not the entirety of God. That's the very important point. So God exists even when the universe doesn't exist. It would have to in order to be God, right? Because God is the one that creates it. So the world in both its manifest and unmanifest states is God, but the manifest state, just remember, the manifest state that we're in now, it's not the whole enchilada. There's another part. So as far as this verse is concerned, all material beings and things are the perishable, and the same universe in its unmanifest state is the imperishable. One is the changing aspect of God, the other one is the changeless aspect of God. Everything is still God. He's made this beautiful distinction. Now he's going to teach us what is truly eternal. And what is that going to be? We're going to find out next time. In the meantime, I have some questions I have to catch up on, so let us take a look at those. So there was one left over from last week. We are studying the 15th chapter. I wanted to know why this specific chapter was chosen. Well, we talked about that. It's mostly verse 14. It's also, in some ways, the reason could be that it's the essence of the Gita. And it's also a reminder of the Supreme Being that we should be thinking about when we're eating food, rather than just the pleasure. So I can think of a few reasons, but the main one is because of verse 14, which we just chanted. Do animals have gunas or only human beings? So remember, gunas is sattva, rajas, and tamas, different energies, you could say. And the answer is an emphatic yes, of course they do, because everything in this universe is made up of nothing but the gunas. So animals have the physical bodies, they have some kind of subtle body also, because there has to be a reflection of consciousness there, so that, like, if we live like a dog in this birth, next life we could become a dog. So it's the same subtle body, not in a human body anymore, now it's in a dog's body. So it has to be gunas, because the body, mind, intellect, everything is made up of gunas. So that's going to go into the next body, whether it's a human one or something else. When I do meditation, is it okay for me to recall all the memories staying with Amma, like darshan experience and Amrita Puri, etc.? Definitely. That's okay. Any kind of meditation that involves form, whether it's a memory or just visualization of some kind, this is what is meant by the topic of upasana. Upasana is, it includes bhakti yoga, but it can also be a little more ritualistic at times. You know, people sitting in front of their in their altar and just chanting archana or visualizing their guru's form or something like that. That all qualifies as upasana, and doing a puja of your own, going to the temple and having a puja done for you, etc. So it is a valid way, kind of sadhana. What is the difference between experiencing objects of senses and being united with the gunas? Another good question. There's no difference. When we experience objects, we are basically being united with the gunas. So it's kind of like, what's the difference between experiencing water and being united with H2O? There's no difference. There's just one is a little more of a technical explanation of the same phenomenon. Well, there was one request for the Amrita Puri live stream link. We kind of deciphered your email address. Hopefully you got a response from us. Otherwise, please send your request again with your full name, WhatsApp number, and email address. There's also a mistake in the email address, I think. Is the Chittabhasa same as the Jivatman? Yes. And so is the Jiva, but they have different nuances. It's looking at that life force in the human body, or in any body, from different standpoints. When we say Chittabhasa, the emphasis is on reflection of consciousness. When we say Jivatman, it is juxtaposing with the Paramatman, and it also emphasizes the fact that we haven't realized the Paramatman. We are ignorant. That knowledge is veiled for me if I'm calling myself the Jivatma. And Jiva literally means beings, but if it's a being, it has that existence and some kind of consciousness. So that Jiva is also potentially the Paramatman. So all these three mean the same thing with different nuances. Somebody asked me a question about astrology, wanting somebody's birth information, which I cannot provide, sorry. Couple more questions here. I need help in understanding the famous quote of Adi Shankaracharya, a human birth, meeting a Mahatma, desire for moksha are very rare gifts. And the question goes, even if a guru awakens someone to understand the goal of the desire for moksha, the journey seems to be a long uphill task. Join the club. To achieve the spiritual goal. Is it quoted as rare because it may take even more births to get a human birth again? Well, you don't have to think about the future so much. Just think about how many lifetimes it took us to get here. We got the human birth. We have a Mahatma, we have an avatara in our life. And if you're watching this, that means you have some degree of desire for liberation. So you've got all three. So, and it took how many lifetimes to get to this point? We don't know. So we don't want to waste it. The meaning is just make it worthwhile. Make the best use of it. That's the only thing we should get from that quote. You don't start thinking about too many other things. And don't forget that it might not be limited to just this creation. Because many creations have taken place, many kalpas we call them, billions and trillions of years, and through that we've gradually evolved to a human body. So that's how precious this life is. That's the idea. I could not find the bhajan you mentioned, and then there's some undecipherable Manasa Mallaril. I think you might be looking for that song. You can look up that song, Manasa Mallaril. That might be the one, but I couldn't understand the first word that you wrote. It doesn't make sense to me, sorry. You also mentioned Amma saying, if you live in the presence of the Guru, attenuation or reduction of the vasanas will be very swift. Do you interpret that to mean physically living at Amritapuri? Could this include living physically elsewhere, but living with Amma in the sense of keeping her presence in your mind? Yes, definitely it's okay to interpret it as being inside, but don't forget that if that alone were enough, Amma wouldn't have needed to take a body. She came down here and she's taken this body for a reason. And that's because the physical presence is more powerful. And at least for some time, we need that presence. And then that inner presence will be more powerful, it'll be more tangible, and it will last longer. So it's yes to both, I would have to say. But we should not discount the importance of the Guru's physical presence. And those, if this person who asked the question is not on the daily live streams, I wholeheartedly recommend that you get on that, because you will feel Amma's physical presence. Sadly it's virtual, but it's better than not having it. And actually there's a lot of rare scenes taking place, on this that we never used to get during Amma's foreign programs. We still want the foreign programs to resume, but in the meantime, she's giving us something equally special. what is the question here? Having done a lot of study of the scriptures, I want to, basically the question is it okay to read the English version of the Bhagavad Gita, because I don't speak Sanskrit, and of course, yes, that's why we publish it, so don't feel bad about it. You can take time and learn Sanskrit, you'll learn, over time, but don't worry about it. But I would suggest you read a few different translations, because you'll see that each word can be translated slightly differently. Some versions of the Gita I would not recommend, but I'm not going to say that on the live stream. Having practiced karma yoga over a period of time, I've seen some improvements in cleansing of the vasanas. However, there are a few vasanas still remaining that I'm concerned about, which are mainly related to trauma I have been through. Some experts told me that I may have to manage the overall situation as it can't be completely cured. Bhagavad Gita, Karma Yoga says several good deeds will remove. I think that means lots of good deeds will remove all vasanas. Does it include vasanas due to trauma, etc.? Okay, Amma says that love is the best medicine. So we can call it karma yoga, we can call it whatever you want, but Amma's, like we heard earlier in today's class, the thing that matters to Amma is love, because that is the fruition of everything. So whether you're doing maunam or fasting or you're studying the scriptures, it should be increasing the love in your heart. If it's not, something is missing. So, and if that love blossoms within you, then you will find that things like trauma, even those deep scars in our heart, can be healed. Maybe not entirely in this birth, but don't forget that, while we typically talk about what happened to us in this lifetime, it may have been lifetimes of different experiences, traumatic or otherwise. So we have this tendency to limit our vision to this birth, but that's actually not fair to ourselves. We've had so many experiences. Maybe we were the aggressor last time or 2 times ago. Whatever it is, it's karma and we have to go through it. But the light at the end of the tunnel should always be love. Because Amma says if it's selfless love, you can't go wrong. And it will solve all your problems, basically. That's her elixir for everything in life. So I would say concentrate on that and don't think about too many different spiritual practices. You cultivate that love for Amma, and then she will help you cultivate love for the world and for all beings. I sense in this question a wondering how long is it going to take. So I'd like to share one analogy or metaphor that is given in India's tradition. People ask, I have a towel that's twisted, and I'm asking somebody, how many times do I have to untwist it in order for it to be straight? What's the answer? You can't answer that unless you know how many times it has already been twisted the other way. So if you twisted it 10 times, you have to twist it back 10 times, right? So the problem is that we don't know how many times we have created our vasanas. We don't know how deep they are. So you just keep trying. You just keep trying, unwinding the towel, and then you'll know when it's over, because it's no longer a problem for you. It's no longer a vasana, or it's no longer an emotional burden for you. So keep making the effort, and Amma will give you encouragement along the way, because that's what the Guru and the scriptures do. You may not know how far you have to go, but Amma will make it feel like it's just around the corner. I remember the first time I went backpacking with my biological father, it was just the 2 of us. It was like I was 12 or 13, or I don't know how old I was, but it was like we're gonna go out. The men are gonna go out and backpacking. Well, I was such a whiner. I look in retrospect. We just started climbing the first, hill, and then I asked my dad, "How far away is the camp where we're gonna, put up our tent?" He says, "It's just a little ways up." And then we got to that little ways up point. I said, "Then where is it?" He says, "See over there? It's over there." And so we got to that point, and then I said, "Is this it?" He said, "No, it's just over there." So like that for about 4 hours we walked. And we set up a tent somewhere in the middle of nowhere in the desolation wilderness of California. And we didn't go back to the car for about 5 days. And we just went around in a big loop, and then I was enjoying it. It just so happened that the first part was kind of steep. So that's how we feel, Initially we feel like things are kind of steep and we're We're not enjoying it a whole lot, but Amma will give us that encouragement, and the scriptures do also. So the combination of the two, especially the Guru's teachings, which are our scriptures, use that as your motivation, and eventually you'll start enjoying it and you'll stop asking how much longer. Namah Shivaya. Let us close for today, and then we will have a short meditation for those who have time to join. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Let us take a few moments to meditate and absorb the teachings that Lord Krishna and Amma have bestowed upon us. Close your eyes, check your posture, and slow down the breathing process. With each long, deep breath, feel the body and mind relaxing further and further. Try to feel Amma's subtle presence as though you are already in her embrace. And feel the light and warmth of her love shining in your heart. Now focus your awareness on the rhythmic flow of your breathing process. Remain as a witness as the flow of the breath peacefully comes in and goes back out. As you witness the flow of the breath, gradually shift your focus away from the breath to the witnesser, the one who witnesses the flow of the breath. If the mind wanders away from that pure witness consciousness, you can resume witnessing the breath, and when the mind settles again, you can identify with just that witness consciousness again. The mind may wander, but keep bringing it back each time it does. Now let us chant the closing mantra together. And as you chant and afterwards, try to maintain that witness consciousness as long as you can. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One long deep breath, and you can open your eyes if you wish as you exhale. Thank you for joining us. This Saturday, the bhajans will be coming from here, the Chicago ashram, and the following Saturday will be a program in the DC ashram, and then the following week, all of us are going to have programs. So it'll be, it is the last weekend of this month. I can't remember how many weeks away it is from now. Amma's birthday is going to be celebrated on the 27th, which is a Monday. And we'll be doing it in various ways. You'll see that it'll be coming to you via email. And the DC ashram will be having a Kartika celebration that Saturday, the 25th. So Kartika is Amma's birth star, so that's also a special day. It's the birth star of her birth here in September. So lots of good things coming up this month, and we will, I hope to continue the class next week as well. Om Namah Shivaya.